I walked into the courtroom wearing my Air Force uniform, ribbons on my chest, captain bars on my shoulders. My father saw me and actually laughed out loud. My mother sighed like I was embarrassing her by existing. They were suing me for elder financial abuse, claiming I'd stolen $300,000 from them while deployed overseas. Their lawyer was smiling, confident, ready to destroy my military career and my reputation. Then the judge looked up from the paperwork, went completely still, and whispered my name like he'd seen a ghost. My father's smile disappeared. My mother grabbed the table, and their lawyer, started frantically flipping through documents like he'd just realized he'd walked into the wrong courtroom. What happened in the next 45 minutes didn't just clear my name. It ended my parents' scheme, exposed 20 years of lies, and proved that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one with the most power to destroy you. The lawsuit papers had arrived at Nellis Air Force Base 3 weeks before my scheduled deployment rotation ended. I was sitting in my quarters in Nevada, still in my flight suit from a training exercise, when the JAG officer knocked on my door with the certified envelope. "Captain Rebecca Stone, you are hereby notified of legal action filed against you in Clark County District Court, Nevada, by plaintiffs Michael Stone and Patricia Stone." My parents were suing me, their own daughter, the daughter who joined the Air Force at 18 to escape them, the daughter who'd been sending the money every month for 14 years despite barely speaking to them, the daughter who'd been deployed overseas for the past 9 months while they'd apparently been planning this. I read through the complaint with the kind of detached focus you develop after years of military training. They were claiming elder financial abuse. According to their lawsuit, I had power of attorney over their accounts, had systematically drained $300,000 from their retirement savings while deployed, and had refused to return the money despite their repeated requests. They were seeking full restitution plus damages for emotional distress. They were also requesting that the court notify my commanding officer about the theft, effectively asking the military to investigate me for conduct unbecoming an officer. Every word was a lie. I didn't have power of attorney over their accounts. I'd never had access to their retirement savings, and the only money that had moved between us was the $500 I sent them every single month, money they demanded I send, or they'd tell everyone I'd abandoned them. But what they didn't know was that I'd been documenting every transaction for 14 years, and the reason I'd been so meticulous about it would destroy them completely. The JAG officer, Major Chen, sat across from my desk, reviewing the documents. "Captain Stone, do you have power of attorney over your parents' financial accounts?" "No, sir. I've never had any access to their accounts beyond what they've voluntarily shown me, which is nothing." "Have you withdrawn any money from accounts belonging to Michael or Patricia Stone?" "No, sir. The only financial relationship I have with them is the $500 I send them monthly via direct deposit." Major Chen made notes. "Why do you send them $500 a month?" I hesitated, then decided the truth was simpler than trying to make my parents sound better than they were. "They demanded it when I joined the Air Force, said I owed them for raising me, said if I didn't send money, they'd tell everyone I'd abandoned my elderly parents." "How old are your parents?" 58 and 56, not exactly elderly, both in good health, both still working. Major Chen looked up from his notes. "Captain, I'm going to be direct with you. This lawsuit is serious. If your parents can produce evidence that you had access to their accounts and withdrew money without authorization, it could result in criminal charges. The military takes financial crimes very seriously, especially when they involve family members and deployed service members." "I understand, sir. I have documentation of every payment I've made to them. I have emails where they've demanded money. I have text messages where they've threatened to ruin my reputation if I didn't comply. I've been documenting this relationship since I was 20 years old." "Why would you document it so thoroughly?" "Because I learned early that my parents see truth as negotiable. They rewrite history constantly. The only way to protect yourself from people like that is to keep receipts." Major Chen studied me for a long moment. "Captain Stone, You're one of our top pilots. Your record is exemplary. Your commanding officer speaks highly of your leadership and your character. I'm going to recommend that you retain civilian counsel for this lawsuit, but I want you to know that JAG will support you through this process. If your parents are making false accusations against a serving officer, we take that very seriously. After Major Chen left, I sat alone in my quarters, pulling up files I'd been keeping for 14 years. Bank statements showing every $500 payment to my parents. Emails dating back to when I was 20, fresh out of basic training, where my mother had outlined exactly how much money I owed them for the cost of raising me. Text messages from my father threatening to call my commanding officer and report me for abandonment if I didn't increase my monthly payments. I'd kept everything because I'd known, even at 18, that my parents were the kind of people who would eventually use anything they could against me. I just hadn't expected them to go this far. What I didn't know yet was that the $300,000 they claimed I'd stolen actually existed. It had actually disappeared from their accounts, and when I found out who'd really taken it, the entire case would explode in ways none of us expected. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after I returned stateside, barely enough time to find a lawyer and prepare a defense. I contacted Sarah Chen, the same lawyer who'd helped my former roommate with a custody case, explaining the situation in a 2-hour consultation that left her both furious and fascinated. "Rebecca," she said, reviewing my documentation, "you have 14 years of evidence showing systematic financial exploitation by your parents. What they're doing, demanding money from you under threat of reputational damage, that's extortion. And now they're compounding it with false accusations of theft. Can they actually win this case? Not if everything you're telling me is true, but I need to understand something. They're claiming $300,000 was taken from their accounts. That's a very specific amount. Do you have any idea where that number came from?" "No idea. I've never seen their bank statements. I don't know anything about their finances beyond what they've demanded from me." Sarah made notes. "We need to find out where that money actually went, because if $300,000 actually disappeared from their accounts, someone took it, and if it wasn't you, we need to figure out who it was." She filed a discovery motion requiring my parents to provide complete bank statements, account records, and documentation of the alleged theft. Their response came back 2 weeks later, and it was surprisingly thin. Bank statements showing a current balance much lower than it should have been given their income. A notarized statement claiming I'd been given power of attorney in 2019 while they were on vacation. No actual power of attorney document. No transaction records showing withdrawals. Just their word that I'd stolen from them. "This is weird," Sarah said, spreading the documents across her conference table. "They're claiming you had power of attorney, but they can't produce the actual document. They're claiming $300,000 was withdrawn, but they can't show the withdrawal records. This feels like they're hiding something." "Or they're just lying about everything," I suggested. "Maybe. But the bank statements are real. The money really is gone. So either they spent it and are blaming you, or someone else took it and they're using you as a scapegoat." What Sarah discovered when she subpoenaed the full bank records would reveal a pattern of fraud that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the golden child my parents had always wished I'd been. The full bank records arrived via subpoena 3 days before the hearing. Sarah called me at 6 a.m., her voice tight with the kind of controlled anger that meant she'd found something significant. "Rebecca, I need you to come to my office immediately. Don't talk to your parents. Don't respond to any messages from them. Just get here." I drove to her office in my civilian clothes, jeans, and an Air Force t-shirt, arriving to find her conference room covered in printed bank statements, highlighted transactions, and handwritten notes connecting various withdrawals to dates and amounts. "Your parents didn't lie about the missing money," Sarah said, without preamble. $317,000 was withdrawn from their accounts over the past 4 years. Large withdrawals, $50,000 to $70,000 at a time, always in cash or cashier's checks made out to various payees. But I didn't. I know you didn't, because I can prove exactly who did. She slid a highlighted bank statement across the table. Look at the signature on the withdrawal slips. I looked at the photocopied signature. It wasn't mine. It was close, similar enough that a casual observer might mistake it, but the loops were wrong. The slant was different. And the name signed wasn't Rebecca Stone. It was Ryan Stone. My brother. My younger brother, who my parents had always treated like he could do no wrong. Ryan, who'd been arrested twice for fraud by the time he was 25. Ryan, who my parents had bailed out repeatedly, paying his legal fees, covering his debts, enabling his pattern of financial crimes, while telling me I was the problem child for joining the military instead of staying home to take care of them. Your brother has been systematically draining your parents' accounts for 4 years, Sarah said, and they either don't know or they do know, and they're blaming you to protect him. I stared at the bank statements, at my brother's forged signature, at the pattern of theft that had been happening while I was deployed overseas serving my country. They know, I said quietly. They have to know. Ryan's been stealing from them since he was a teenager. They've always covered for him. This is just more of the same. Then why sue you? Because I'm easier to blame. Because admitting Ryan stole from them means admitting they raised a thief and enabled him for decades. Because blaming me means they can play the victim and maybe even get money out of me to cover what Ryan took. Sarah sat back in her chair. Rebecca, this changes everything. We're not just defending you against false accusations. We're exposing fraud and possibly filing criminal charges against your brother. Are you prepared for that? I thought about 18-year-old me joining the Air Force to escape parents who'd made it clear I was never good enough. I thought about 14 years of sending them money I could barely afford because they'd threatened my reputation. I thought about 9 months deployed overseas while they'd been planning this lawsuit, probably with Ryan's encouragement, knowing I'd be too far away to defend myself effectively. I'm prepared, I said. Let's burn it all down. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in my Air Force service dress uniform, blues, as we called them, the formal uniform with ribbons displaying my service record, my captain's bars polished to mirror shine, my name tag perfectly aligned. Sarah had suggested civilian clothes to seem less intimidating, but I'd refused. If my parents were going to accuse a serving officer of theft, they were going to face that officer in uniform. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, sitting in my car reviewing the evidence Sarah had compiled. Bank statements showing Ryan's signature on withdrawal slips. Police reports from his previous fraud arrests that my parents had paid lawyers to minimize. Emails between my mother and Ryan discussing how to handle the Rebecca problem if she ever found out about the money. They'd known. They'd known Ryan was stealing from them, and they'd decided to blame me rather than hold their golden child accountable. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. We can still settle this before court. Admit you took the money, pay us back in installments, we'll drop the charges. No need to make this public. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to people who'd chosen lies over truth, chosen protecting one child by destroying another. But what I didn't know was that the judge assigned to this case had a connection to me that would make my parents' scheme implode before they even finished their opening statement. I walked into the courtroom at exactly 9 a.m., my uniform drawing immediate attention from everyone present. The bailiff straightened. The court reporter looked up with surprise, and my parents, sitting at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, had reactions that told me everything I needed to know about their mindset. My father saw me and laughed, actually laughed out loud, like I'd shown up to a formal event in a clown costume. Really, Becca? You're going to play dress-up soldier to get sympathy? My mother sighed, that long, suffering sound she'd perfected over decades of making me feel like my existence was an inconvenience. Always so dramatic. This is a courthouse, not a military parade. Their lawyer, A man named Richard Castellano, who I'd looked up online and found specialized in elder law, looked at me with the kind of smug confidence that came from believing he had an open and shut case. His clients had told him their daughter was a thief. He had their sworn statements. He had bank records showing missing money. In his mind, this was a simple case of an ungrateful child stealing from elderly parents. He had no idea what was coming. Sarah arrived 30 seconds after me, carrying 3 briefcases full of documentation. She nodded to me once, a silent communication that everything was ready, and took her seat at the defense table. The bailiff called us to order. All rise. The Honorable Judge David Martinez presiding. Judge Martinez entered from his chambers, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen every scam and scheme imaginable in his courtroom. He took his seat, opened the case file, and began reading the complaint summary. Then he looked up. His eyes found me in my uniform, and he went completely still. Captain Stone? His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom it carried clearly. I stood at attention. Yes, Your Honor. My father's laugh died in his throat. My mother's hands gripped the table edge. Castellano started frantically flipping through his documents like he'd just realized something was very wrong. Judge Martinez continued staring at me, his expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and then something harder. Anger, maybe, or disappointment in what he was seeing in this courtroom. Captain Rebecca Stone, he said louder now, formerly Lieutenant Stone, 58th Fighter Squadron, correct? Yes, Your Honor, currently assigned to Nellis Air Force Base. And these are your parents suing you for elder financial abuse and theft of $300,000? Yes, Your Honor. What Judge Martinez said next would reveal why he recognized me and why my parents' case was already over before it began. Judge Martinez set down the case file and removed his reading glasses, his gaze moving from me to my parents with an expression of barely controlled disgust. Mr. and Mrs. Stone, I need to inform you of something before we proceed. 6 years ago, your daughter was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism in combat operations. I know this because I was present at the ceremony. I was invited as a guest of honor because my son, Major Carlos Martinez, served in the same squadron as your daughter. He credits Captain Stone with saving his life when their formation came under fire during a mission over hostile territory. The color drained from my mother's face. My father had gone very still, his earlier confidence evaporating. My son has told me many stories about Captain Stone over the years, Judge Martinez continued, his voice cold now, about her leadership, her integrity, her willingness to put herself at risk to protect her squadron. He's also told me about her family situation, about parents who demanded money from her while she was deployed, about parents who threatened to ruin her reputation if she didn't comply with their financial demands, about parents who treated their service member daughter as a source of income rather than a person deserving of respect. Castellano was on his feet. Your Honor, I request you recuse yourself from this case due to personal connection to the defendant. Sit down, Mr. Castellano, Judge Martinez said sharply. I'm not recusing myself. My knowledge of Captain Stone's character, gained through my son's first-hand accounts and through witnessing her receive one of the Air Force's highest honors for valor, does not constitute bias. It constitutes relevant character evidence. And given what I know about this young woman, I'm very interested to hear how you're going to prove she's a thief. He looked at me then, and his expression softened slightly. Captain Stone, you may be seated. Mr. Castellano, you may present your opening statement, and I suggest you make it good, because right now I'm looking at 2 people in their 50s claiming elder abuse against their 32-year-old daughter who's been serving her country while you've apparently been planning this lawsuit. Castellano stood again, visibly shaken, shuffling his notes. Your Honor, my clients are the victims of financial exploitation by their daughter. Over the past 4 years, Captain Stone used power of attorney to withdraw $317,000 from their accounts without permission. They only discovered the theft when they reviewed their statements and found the money missing. Despite repeated requests for return of their savings, Captain Stone has refused and has cut off contact with them. "Do you have the power of attorney document?" Judge Martinez asked. "We have a notarized statement from my clients confirming that power of attorney was granted in 2019. "That's not what I asked. Do you have the actual power of attorney document signed by your clients and by Captain Stone, properly witnessed and filed?" Castellano hesitated. "The document was lost, Your Honor, but my client's sworn statement is not a power of attorney document," Judge Martinez finished. "Continue." "Your Honor, the bank statements clearly show that money was withdrawn from my client's accounts. Someone took that money. My clients state it was their daughter. The burden of proof is on you, Mr. Castellano. You're the plaintiff. You need to prove your case. So far, you've told me money is missing, and your clients blame their daughter. That's an accusation, not evidence." Judge Martinez turned to Sarah. "Ms. Chen, I assume you have a response to these allegations?" Sarah stood, and I could see the predatory satisfaction in her posture. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. "Your Honor, the defense has extensive evidence that not only proves Captain Stone did not take any money from her parents, but also reveals who actually took the money and why the plaintiffs chose to blame their daughter rather than the real thief." My mother made a small sound of distress. My father had his head down, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. "The defense would like to present bank records obtained through subpoena showing the actual signatures on the withdrawal slips for the missing $317,000. These signatures do not belong to Captain Stone. They belong to Ryan Stone, the plaintiff's son and the defendant's younger brother." Sarah approached the bench with a stack of photocopied withdrawal slips. Judge Martinez reviewed them carefully, comparing the signatures to the exemplar signature from my military records. "These signatures are clearly not the same," he said. "Mr. Castellano, did your clients inform you they have a son?" "They mentioned a son, yes, but they indicated he had no involvement." "Their son's signature is on every single withdrawal slip for the missing money," Judge Martinez interrupted. "Did they mention that?" Castellano looked at my parents. My mother was crying now, silent tears running down her face. My father still wouldn't look up. "I was not informed of that, Your Honor," Castellano said quietly, and I could hear in his voice that he was realizing he'd been lied to, that he'd brought a fraudulent case before a judge, that his reputation was about to take a significant hit. What came next would force my parents to either admit they'd known about Ryan's theft all along or commit perjury in front of a judge who already didn't believe them. Judge Martinez leaned back in his chair, his expression hard. "Mrs. Stone, Mr. Stone, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you know your son Ryan was withdrawing money from your accounts?" My mother looked at their lawyer desperately. Castellano looked like he wanted to disappear. My father finally raised his head. "We knew," he said quietly. The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over the keys. "You knew," Judge Martinez repeated. "You knew your son was taking money from your accounts, and you chose to file a lawsuit against your daughter claiming she did it. Is that correct?" "Ryan has problems," my mother said, her voice shaking. "He struggled his whole life. We were trying to help him. We thought if we could get some money from Rebecca, we could cover what Ryan took and get him help, and no one would have to know." "So this lawsuit was never about theft," Judge Martinez said. "This was about forcing your daughter to pay for your son's crimes." "She has money," my father said, and there was resentment in his voice now, the old bitterness coming through. "She has a military salary, benefits, that signing bonus. She could afford to help us. Ryan needed the money more than she did." "Ryan stole from you," Judge Martinez said flatly. "And rather than hold him accountable, You decided to destroy your daughter's reputation and potentially her military career to cover for him. She was never there for us anyway, my mother said, crying harder now. She left when she was 18, joined the military instead of staying home where we needed her. She abandoned us for that uniform and those medals. The least she could do is help us when we needed money. I felt Sarah's hand on my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm, to let this play out. But inside, I was burning with a rage I'd been suppressing for 14 years. They'd always resented me for leaving, for choosing a life that didn't revolve around their needs and Ryan's constant crises, for succeeding in spite of them rather than because of them. "Captain Stone," Judge Martinez said, looking at me, "do you have anything you'd like to say?" I stood at attention again. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence showing I've been sending my parents $500 per month for the past 14 years, totaling $84,000. I'd also like to submit emails and text messages showing they demanded this money under threat of damaging my reputation with my commanding officers. I've never had access to their bank accounts. I've never withdrawn a single dollar from them. The only financial relationship we've had is me sending the money they demanded while threatening me if I didn't comply." I handed Sarah a flash drive. She plugged it into her laptop and projected emails onto the courtroom screen. My mother's words, cold and calculated. "You owe us for raising you. $500 a month is the minimum. If you don't send it, I'll call your commanding officer and tell him you've abandoned your elderly parents. See how that affects your military career." More emails, more demands, threats when I was deployed that they'd tell everyone I was a terrible daughter if I didn't increase my payments. Reminders that Ryan needed help, and why wasn't I contributing more to support my struggling brother? Judge Martinez read each email in silence. Then he looked at my parents with unconcealed contempt. "You extorted money from your daughter while she was serving overseas. You enabled your son to steal over $300,000 from your own accounts. And then you filed a fraudulent lawsuit, attempting to blame your daughter for your son's crimes and force her to pay you back for money you gave him voluntarily. Is that a fair summary?" Neither of my parents answered. "Mr. Castellano," Judge Martinez said, "I'm dismissing this case with prejudice. Your clients have committed fraud upon this court by filing false accusations. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of possible criminal charges, including filing a false police report, fraud, and extortion. I'm also sanctioning your clients for court costs and attorney fees for the defense." He turned to me. "Captain Stone, I apologize that you've had to endure this. Your service to this country deserves better than parents who would attempt to destroy your career to cover for their own failures. This case is dismissed." The gavel came down. My parents sat in stunned silence. Castellano was already packing his briefcase, clearly planning to withdraw from representing them as quickly as legally possible. But what happened as I walked out of that courtroom would prove that sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away from people who never deserved you in the first place. I walked out of that courtroom with Sarah beside me, my uniform still crisp despite the 2 hours we'd spent systematically dismantling my parents' case. Behind us, I could hear my mother crying, my father's angry voice saying something I couldn't make out. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say to people who'd been willing to destroy me to protect my brother. The courthouse lobby was empty, except for a man in an Air Force uniform standing near the windows. Major Carlos Martinez, Judge Martinez's son, the pilot I'd served with in the 58th Fighter Squadron. He straightened when he saw me, a genuine smile crossing his face. "Captain Stone, I heard you were in my father's courtroom today. Thought I'd stop by and make sure you didn't need backup." "Your father handled it," I said. "I didn't know he'd be the judge assigned to the case." "Neither did I until this morning when he called me. Asked me to confirm some things about your character and your service record. I told him the truth, that you're one of the best officers I've ever served with, that you saved my life and 3 other pilots when we came under fire, that if your parents were accusing you of theft, they were either lying or insane." Sarah excused herself to make some calls, leaving Carlos and me standing in the courthouse lobby. Through the windows, I could see news vans pulling up. Someone had tipped off the media about a serving officer being sued by her parents. This was going to be a story whether I wanted it to be or not. "How did it go in there, Lala?" Carlos asked. My parents admitted they knew my brother stole from them. They admitted they filed the lawsuit to force me to pay them back for money they gave him. Judge Martinez dismissed with prejudice and referred them for criminal investigation. Carlos let out a low whistle. "Your parents accused a decorated combat veteran of theft to cover for your brother's crimes. That's not going to play well in the media." "I don't want media attention. I just want to go back to base and forget this ever happened." "Becca, you can't forget this. Your parents tried to destroy your career. They extorted money from you for 14 years. They filed false charges that could have resulted in you losing your commission. You don't just walk away from that and pretend it didn't happen." But walking away was exactly what I'd been doing my entire life, and what Carlos said next would make me realize that running from my past was preventing me from ever truly being free of it. "My father wants to talk to you," Carlos said. "Off the record, he's concerned about some things that came up in that courtroom." I met Judge Martinez in his chambers 30 minutes later, after he'd finished his morning docket. He'd removed his robes and sat in his office in shirt sleeves, looking more like someone's father than a district court judge. "Captain Stone, thank you for staying. I wanted to speak with you privately about what I witnessed today." He gestured to a chair, and I sat, still in uniform, still feeling like I was on some kind of bizarre official duty. "What your parents did in my courtroom constitutes several crimes," he began. "Filing false accusations, attempted fraud, extortion. The district attorney will investigate, and based on what I saw, they'll likely file charges. But I'm more concerned about something else." He pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. "You've been sending your parents $500 a month for 14 years under threat that they'd damage your military career if you didn't comply. That's $84,000. Captain, that's financial abuse. That's extortion. And it's been going on since you were 18 years old." "I knew what I was doing," I said. "I chose to send the money to keep them quiet." "You were a teenager when this started. You'd just finished basic training. You were trying to build a career in the military, and your parents threatened to destroy it if you didn't pay them. That's not a choice, Captain. That's coercion." I didn't know what to say to that. For 14 years, I'd told myself I was choosing to send the money, that I was being smart by keeping them satisfied and distant. But hearing Judge Martinez call it what it actually was, coercion, extortion, abuse, made something crack in the foundation of how I'd understood my own history. "What do you want me to do?" I asked finally. "I want you to file charges against them for extortion. I want you to pursue full restitution for the money they took from you under threat. I want you to stop protecting people who've spent your entire adult life exploiting you. They're my parents. They're criminals who happen to share your DNA. There's a difference." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Captain, my son told me something about you once. He said you were the bravest pilot he'd ever flown with, but also the most isolated. He said you never talked about your family, never went home on leave, never seemed to have anyone waiting for you when you returned from deployment. He was worried about you. Now I understand why." The crack in my foundation widened. I learned early that I was on my own. My parents made it clear I was the disappointing child. My brother was the one they loved, the one they protected, the one whose failures they covered up while criticizing everything I did right. Joining the military was my escape. I thought if I just sent them money and stayed away, I could build a life they couldn't touch. But they did touch it. They filed a lawsuit attempting to destroy your reputation and your career. They would have succeeded if you hadn't documented everything, if I hadn't happened to be assigned to this case, if their own lies hadn't been so transparent. You got lucky, Captain. Next time you might not be. There won't be a next time. I'm done with them. Then make it official. File charges. Get a restraining order. Reclaim that $84,000. Stop letting them win by suffering in silence. What I decided in Judge Martinez's chambers would determine whether I finally fought back or continued the pattern of quiet endurance that had defined my relationship with my family for 3 decades. I left the courthouse with Sarah and Carlos, the 3 of us standing in the parking lot while news cameras filmed from a distance. Sarah was already fielding calls from reporters wanting my statement. Carlos was running. Interference. His major's rank and his obvious connection to me making the reporters hesitate to approach directly. I want to file charges, I told Sarah. For the extortion, I want to pursue full restitution for the $84,000, and I want a restraining order preventing them from contacting me or anyone in my chain of command. Sarah nodded, already making notes on her phone. I'll file the paperwork this afternoon. The district attorney is going to love this case. Serving military officer extorted by parents who then filed false charges when she stopped being useful to them. It's going to be a media circus, Becca. Are you prepared for that? I've faced enemy fire. I can handle reporters. It's not the reporters I'm worried about, Sarah said quietly. It's your parents. When people like this get cornered, they get desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things. She was right to worry. The first threat came that evening, a text from my mother's phone to my personal number that I hadn't blocked yet because I'd needed to preserve evidence for the lawsuit. You've destroyed this family. Ryan is devastated. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. If anything happens to either of them, their blood is on your hands. You were always selfish, but this is beyond anything I imagined. We gave you life, and this is how you repay us. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Sarah. She responded within minutes. That's witness intimidation and harassment. I'm adding it to the restraining order petition. Don't respond. Don't engage. Just document. More messages followed over the next few days. My father claiming I'd ruined them financially. My mother saying I was a disgrace to the family. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, later traced to my brother Ryan, threatening that I'd regret making this public, that I didn't understand what I'd done, that there would be consequences. Each message was documented, screenshotted, added to the growing file that Sarah was building. The district attorney's office was already moving forward with charges against my parents, fraud for the false lawsuit, extortion for the 14 years of coerced payments, filing a false police report for claiming I'd stolen money when they knew Ryan had taken it. Ryan was facing his own charges. The bank records Sarah had subpoenaed showed a clear pattern of forgery and theft. He'd been stealing from our parents for years, and they'd been covering for him, enabling him, protecting him from consequences, until the money ran out and they needed a scapegoat. But what I didn't know was that Ryan had one more play left, and what he did next would force me to choose between the family I was born into and the family I'd built in the Air Force. The call came at 0200 hours, pulling me from sleep in my quarters at Nellis. The base security officer, Lieutenant Morrison, her voice professional but concerned. Captain Stone, we have a situation at the main gate. A man claiming to be your brother is demanding to see you. He's intoxicated and becoming aggressive with gate security. We need you to come down and identify him before we involve civilian police. I dressed quickly and drove to the main gate, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and dread. Ryan, drunk at 2 a.m, causing a scene at my base. This was exactly the kind of thing my parents had always protected him from. Now he was my problem. He was sitting in the security office when I arrived, handcuffed, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. 27 years old and he looked 40, the effects of years of substance abuse and zero accountability etched into his features. There she is, he slurred when he saw me. The perfect daughter, the hero. Captain fucking Rebecca Stone, destroyer of families. Ryan, you need to leave. You're trespassing on a military installation. I needed to talk to you. You won't answer my calls. Mom and Dad won't tell me where you live. You're hiding behind this uniform like it makes you better than us. I'm not hiding. I'm serving my country, something you've never understood. Serving your country, he mocked. You're serving your ego. You always thought you were better than me, better than Mom and Dad, better than all of us. Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. Sir, you need to calm down, or we're calling civilian police to arrest you for trespassing and public intoxication. She ruined my life, Ryan shouted, lurching to his feet despite the handcuffs. I took that money because Mom and Dad gave it to me. They wanted me to have it. And now she's got them facing criminal charges because she's a vindictive bitch who can't stand that they love me more than they ever loved her. The words hung in the air like poison. They love me more than they ever loved her. The truth spoken out loud, the thing I'd known my entire life, but had never heard anyone admit directly. You're right, I said quietly. They do love you more. They've always loved you more. They've protected you, enabled you, covered up your crimes, and sacrificed everything, including their own financial security, to keep you from facing consequences. And you know what, Ryan? That's not love. That's dysfunction disguised as love. Real love includes accountability. Real love means helping someone become better, not enabling them to stay broken. Fuck you and your psychology degree from YouTube. I don't have a psychology degree. I have 14 years of distance from a family that was destroying me. I have a career I built despite you all. I have self-respect I earned by refusing to be what you wanted me to be. And I have documentation proving that while I was deployed serving my country, you were stealing from our parents, and they were blaming me for it. Ryan's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with the self-pity of someone who'd never been held accountable and couldn't understand why it was happening. Now, they're going to prison because of you. They're facing charges because they filed false accusations against a serving officer and extorted money from me for 14 years. Their choices, Ryan, not mine. You could make this go away. You could tell the DA you don't want to press charges. You could save them. What I said next would end any possibility of reconciliation with my birth family, and I'd never been more certain that I was making the right choice. No, I said simply. I spent 18 years trying to earn their love by being perfect. I spent 14 more years trying to buy their silence by sending them money I could barely afford. I'm done. They made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. You're destroying our family. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to be destroyed anymore. There's a difference. Lieutenant Morrison had called the civilian police while Ryan and I were talking. They arrived within minutes, took custody of him, charged him with trespassing and public intoxication, and transported him to the county jail. I gave a statement, signed paperwork, and drove back to my quarters as the sun was beginning to rise over the Nevada desert. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat in my quarters drinking coffee and staring at the photos on my wall. Photos of my squadron, pilots I'd served with, missions I'd flown. Major Carlos Martinez shaking my hand after I'd received the Distinguished Flying Cross. My commanding officer pinning on my captain's bars. Sarah and I at dinner celebrating the dismissal of my parents' lawsuit. These were my people. This was my family. Not the people who'd spent 32 years telling me I wasn't good enough, that I owed them for the inconvenience of raising me, that my success was somehow an insult to their failures. My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. Heard about the incident at the gate last night. You okay? I responded, I'm okay, just tired of cleaning up their messes. You're not responsible for cleaning up anything. They made their choices. You're just finally choosing yourself. He was right. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself over the people who'd taught me I was supposed to sacrifice everything for family, even when that family was toxic and destructive. The restraining order was granted 2 days later. My parents were legally barred from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of me, from contacting anyone in my chain of command. Violations would result in immediate arrest. The district attorney moved forward with charges. My parents were indicted on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and filing false police reports. Ryan was indicted for forgery and theft. All three of them were facing potential prison time, though their lawyers were already negotiating plea deals. Sarah filed a civil suit for restitution of the $84,000 they'd extorted from me over 14 years, plus interest, plus damages for emotional distress and attempted damage to my military career. The lawsuit named both my parents and Ryan as defendants. "They're going to fight this," Sarah warned me. "They're going to claim you're vindictive, that you're using your military status to bully them, that they're the victims here. Are you prepared for that narrative?" They've been using that narrative my entire life. I'm used to it. But now it's going to be public. News outlets are already covering this story. Military officers sued by parents who then get charged with extortion and fraud. It's national news, Becca. People are going to have opinions. She was right. The story had been picked up by military news sites first, then mainstream media, then social media, where it exploded into debates about family obligations, toxic parents, and whether children owed their parents for being raised. The comments were split. Half the people supported me, shared their own stories of family exploitation, praised me for standing up to abusive parents. The other half condemned me, called me ungrateful, said I was destroying my family over money, claimed real daughters would forgive and move on. But what happened when the story reached my extended family would show me exactly who'd been enabling my parents all along and who'd been secretly rooting for me to finally break free. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called me 3 days after the story went national. I almost didn't answer, assuming she was calling to tell me I'd broken my mother's heart, that I was tearing the family apart, that I needed to drop the charges and apologize. "Becca," she said when I answered, "I need to tell you something I should have told you 20 years ago." "Aunt Linda, if you're calling to defend them—" "I'm not defending anyone. I'm calling to apologize. I watched your mother treat you like you were a burden your entire childhood. I watched her praise Ryan for things you did better. I watched her take credit for your accomplishments while blaming you for Ryan's failures. And I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that all families had their dynamics, that you seemed strong enough to handle it. I was wrong. I should have said something. I should have protected you." I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. "You knew?" "Everyone knew, Becca. The whole family saw how differently she treated you and Ryan, how she'd brag about Ryan's mediocre achievements while dismissing your actual successes, how she'd demand money from you while giving Ryan whatever he wanted, how she'd talk about you like you were a disappointment when you were literally a decorated military officer. We all saw it. We just didn't say anything because it was easier to pretend it was normal. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw the news coverage. I read the court documents that were filed publicly. I saw proof of what I'd suspected for years, that your mother was extorting money from you, that your parents covered up Ryan's theft by blaming you. And I realized that my silence made me complicit. So I'm calling to tell you that you're right, that you've always been right, that they treated you terribly, and you don't owe them forgiveness or money or anything else." I was crying, silent tears running down my face, while my Aunt Linda continued talking. "I'm also calling because I'm prepared to testify if needed, about what I witnessed, about the differential treatment, the financial exploitation, the way they used you as a scapegoat while enabling Ryan. If it helps your case, I'll say it in court." "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means more than you know." "You deserved better, Becca. You've always deserved better. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." After we hung up, I sat in my quarters staring at my phone. My Aunt Linda wasn't the only family member who reached out. Over the next few days, I heard from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, from my father's brother, who'd always seemed uncomfortable at family gatherings, from my grandmother, who was 92, and told me in her crackling voice that she'd never understood why my mother treated me so poorly. They'd all seen it, they'd all known, and they'd all stayed silent because speaking up would have meant confronting my mother, disrupting family peace, choosing sides in a conflict they preferred to ignore. But the message that shocked me most came from someone I'd never expected to hear from, and what this person revealed would explain why my parents had been so desperate for money that they'd been willing to destroy me to get it. The email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, "Information about your parents you need to know." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. "Captain Stone, my name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm a financial investigator with the Nevada Gaming Commission. I've been following your case in the news because it intersects with an investigation we've been conducting into your parents' gambling activities at several Las Vegas casinos. I'd like to speak with you about information that may be relevant to your civil suit against them. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." I called the number she provided, verified she was actually a gaming commission investigator, and agreed to meet her at a coffee shop off base the next morning. Jennifer Morrison was in her 40s, professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase that she opened to reveal spreadsheets and casino records. "Captain Stone, thank you for meeting with me. What I'm about to tell you is part of an ongoing investigation, but it's information that's relevant to your legal case and that you have a right to know." "What does this have to do with gambling?" "Your parents have been regular gamblers at 3 Las Vegas casinos for the past 6 years. We've been tracking their activity because it fits a pattern we see with problem gamblers who are funding their habit through fraudulent means. In the past 6 years, your parents have lost approximately $470,000 gambling." The number hit me like a physical blow. $470,000, more than my annual salary, more than I'd make in 10 years of active duty. "How did they get that kind of money?" I asked, though I was starting to understand. "That's what we've been investigating. Some of it came from your brother's theft from their accounts. Some came from credit cards they maxed out and defaulted on. And some, Captain Stone, came from you. The $500 a month you were sending them for 14 years. That's $84,000. We have records showing regular cash deposits to their casino accounts matching your payment schedule." I'd been funding my parents' gambling addiction for 14 years. The money they demanded under threat of ruining my military career hadn't been for living expenses or Ryan's problems. It had been for casinos, slot machines, poker tables, sports betting. "They were using me," I said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes, and when your money stopped being enough, when your brother's theft couldn't cover their losses, they filed the lawsuit against you hoping to get a large settlement. They were desperate, Captain Stone. Gamblers with this level of debt often are. They were likely planning to use any settlement money to pay off casino markers and credit card debt." Jennifer slid a folder across the table. "This is a summary of their gambling activity and debt. I'm providing it to you because it's relevant to your restitution case. It proves they weren't elderly people struggling with expenses who needed help from their daughter. They were gambling addicts using you as a funding source. What I did with this information would either break me or finally free me, and I was done being broken by people who'd never seen me as anything more than a resource to exploit." I took the gambling records to Sarah, who reviewed them with the same horrified fascination I'd felt reading them the first time. $470,000 lost gambling, $84,000 from me used to fund their addiction. The lawsuit against me was their Hail Mary attempt to get more money when all other sources had dried up. "This changes everything," Sarah said. "This isn't just extortion and fraud. This is financial exploitation to fund a gambling addiction. The court is going to see your parents very differently when they understand they were using their military daughter as a personal ATM to support their casino habit." "I want to go public with this," I said. "I want everyone who's been calling me ungrateful and vindictive to understand what they were really doing." "Are you sure? Once this is public, there's no taking it back. Your parents will be completely exposed. They tried to destroy my career to cover up their gambling debt. They extorted money from me for 14 years to feed their addiction. They blamed me for Ryan's theft when they were stealing from me just as much as he was stealing from them. I'm done protecting them." Sarah held a press conference 2 days later. The gambling records were entered into public court documents. The news coverage shifted dramatically. The narrative changed from ungrateful daughter sues elderly parents to military officer exploited by gambling addict parents. The comments changed too. The people who'd been calling me vindictive went quiet. The people who'd supported me felt vindicated, and new commenters appeared, people who'd experienced similar exploitation, who'd been used as funding sources for family members' addictions, who understood exactly what I'd survived. My parents' lawyers tried to suppress the gambling records, claiming they were irrelevant to the case. Judge Martinez denied the motion, ruling that evidence of how my parents used the money they extorted from me was absolutely relevant to determining damages. The plea negotiations collapsed. The district attorney offered my parents a deal: plead guilty to reduce charges, accept probation and restitution, or go to trial where the full extent of their gambling addiction and financial exploitation would be presented to a jury. They refused, apparently believing they could still convince a jury they were victims. Ryan took a deal, pleaded guilty to theft and forgery, accepted 3 years probation and full restitution to our parents for the money he'd stolen from them. He'd have to pay back $317,000. He'd be in debt for the rest of his life. My parents' trial was scheduled for 6 months out. In the meantime, my life continued. I flew training missions, mentored junior pilots, prepared for my next deployment rotation. The Air Force had stood by me throughout the entire ordeal, my commanding officer making it clear that false accusations against a decorated officer would not be tolerated and that my career was secure. Major Carlos Martinez was promoted to lieutenant colonel. At his promotion ceremony, he pulled me aside. "My father wanted me to tell you something. He said watching you stand up to your parents in his courtroom was one of the most powerful things he'd witnessed in 30 years as a judge. He said you reminded him why he became a judge in the first place: to protect people who couldn't protect themselves and to hold accountable people who abused positions of trust." "I was protecting myself," I said. "I wasn't trying to be powerful or inspirational." "That's what made it powerful. You weren't performing for anyone. You were just refusing to be destroyed. Sometimes that's the most radical thing a person can do." 6 months later, my parents' trial began. I testified for 2 hours, walking the jury through 14 years of extortion, the lawsuit they'd filed knowing it was false, the gambling addiction they'd funded with my money. Sarah presented the evidence systematically, building a case so airtight that even my parents' lawyer looked defeated by the second day. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced them to 2 years in prison, suspended pending completion of 5 years probation, mandatory gambling addiction treatment, and full restitution to me of $84,000 plus interest and damages, totaling $137,000. They appealed. The appeal was denied. The judgment stood. I never spoke to them again. They tried contacting me through relatives, through letters sent to my base, through email accounts they created just to get around my blocks. Each attempt was documented and reported as a restraining order violation. After the third violation resulted in my father spending a weekend in jail, they finally stopped. 3 years later, I was promoted to major. 5 years later, I made lieutenant colonel. My career flourished in the absence of people who'd spent 32 years telling me I wasn't good enough. I still send money every month, but now I send it to an organization that helps young service members dealing with financial abuse from family members. I send it to programs that teach financial literacy to teenagers preparing to join the military. I send it to support groups for adult children of narcissistic parents. The money my parents tried to take from me now helps people escape situations like the one I survived, and that feels like justice in a way a court judgment never could. 8 years after walking into that courtroom in uniform, I received an email from a young airman stationed at Lackland Air Force Base. "Major Stone, I just finished basic training. My parents are demanding I send them half my paycheck, or they'll call my commander and say I abandoned them. I was going to do it because I didn't know I had a choice. Then I read about your case. You showed me that saying no was possible. Thank you for fighting back. You saved me from making the same mistake you made for 14 years. You saved me from them." I read that email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not sad tears, relief tears. The tears of someone who'd survived something terrible and had somehow managed to turn that survival into a roadmap for others. I'd walked into a courtroom expecting to defend myself against false accusations. Instead, I'd exposed a lifetime of exploitation, held my parents accountable for crimes they'd committed with confidence they'd never face consequences, and shown thousands of other people that standing up to family wasn't betrayal. Sometimes it was survival. My father laughed when he saw my uniform. My mother sighed like I was an embarrassment. They thought military service made me weak, that the uniform was a costume, that I was playing dress-up soldier for sympathy. They didn't understand that the uniform represented everything they'd never been able to destroy in me: discipline, honor, service, integrity, the values they'd tried to beat out of me by treating me like I was worthless, like I owed them for existing, like my only purpose was to fund their lifestyle and cover for my brother's crimes. The judge whispered my name like he'd seen a ghost, because he recognized what my parents had never been able to see: that I was a decorated combat veteran, a leader, an officer who'd earned every ribbon on my chest through sacrifice they couldn't comprehend. And in that moment, everything changed. The power dynamic shifted. The narrative collapsed. The truth emerged from 14 years of documentation and silence. I walked out of that courthouse free of their lies, free of their expectations, free of the belief that I owed them anything beyond what any decent person owes another. Basic respect earned through mutual reciprocity, not demanded through biology. They gave me life, yes, but I gave myself everything that made that life worth living. If Captain Stone's choice to fight back instead of staying silent resonated with you, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment was when the judge recognized her and her father's laugh died in his throat. What was yours? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever been exploited by family who thought you'd never fight back, know that documentation is power and silence protects abusers. Subscribe for more stories of people who chose themselves and never looked back.